So it's episode 8, Winds of War. It's a low-key episode, but it's very well regarded. Even if you search just the keyword, Winds of War, you'll find loads of blogs calling this episode a masterpiece. For example, in Winds of War, Kai Shiden makes his first sortie in the Guncannon and shows off some pretty underhanded tactics. At first he mouths off, "Sayla, yeah, I'm going," all big talk. He even tumbles just jumping down from white base, almost in tears, takes fire, and, tears streaming, blurts, "I can do it, I can," showing a bit of grit. And in the end, when Amuro's in danger, he wins by shoving a Zaku 2 off a cliff from behind as it aims at the Gundam, totally sneaky. That slyness is funny, and some blogs spotlight that part. There's also a human interest beat, with a Zeon soldier helping a parent and child trying to return home. Plus, Shar Aznable scheming. He basically says it out loud, technically to himself, grumbling that Garma is incompetent, a pampered rich kid, and so on. So it serves as a turning point for the whole story. But it's not a crucial episode. That's why, in the compilation films, everything here is cut except Kai's first Guncannon sortie. It's what TV anime often has. Could exist or not, filler-type episode. Because TV series run long, when they're sold to regional stations, the key station might air all 43 episodes, but locals get preempted by things like a Yosakoi festival, or, in Hokkaido, a special on students visiting the mainland on school trips. So not all 43 episodes air locally. Sometimes they have to trim to 40 or 41. Long series therefore include Slot Adjuster episodes like Kukuru's Doan's Island or Time, Be Still. I think Winds of War was also written to be adjustable, but it turned out way too good. The script is by Kenichi Matsuzaki of Studio Nue. Studio Nui is the amateur group from Keio University's sci-fi club that later made the Superdimension Fortress Macross. They're basically a prototype of what Gainax would later be. A leading figure from there is director Shoji Kawamori. By the way, I once attended Kawamori's wedding. Back then, weddings usually screened color slides, black and white if you were unlucky. At my generation's weddings, childhood photos were still sometimes monochrome. If all your childhood photos were color, you were well off. If there was 8mm film, you were... Kawamori came up from Keio's elementary school, so his childhood footage at the wedding was on 16mm. How rich were your parents? The film showed his 6th birthday party. About half the kids weren't Japanese. There was even a blonde girl with a name like Ing, that kind of scene. Even at the wedding, about half the guests were Keio connections, properly brought up elites. People like Fujihiko Hosono saying, "I've never worn a shirt without a collar." Wait, was that Haruhiko Mikimoto? Sorry, yes, it was Mikimoto. Remembered. Half the room were Keio gentlemen. The other half were folks like Kazutaka Miyatake and, well, us public school kids who went to regular prefectural high schools, the poor boys. That day I first grasped what A-class gap really felt like. Anyway, this script comes from that elite sulfur monofluoride visual crowd at Studio New. But I can't say whether Matsuzaki's script itself was what made it great. In Tomino's works, many turning point episodes were written by Matsuzaki, so I used to credit him for the brilliance. But in pivotal episodes, Tomino packed in his own story beats and even rewrote dialogue on set, so it's unclear how much of Matsuzaki's draft remained. Anyway, I digress. This looks like a slot adjuster, an episode that seems dispensable to the main plot. Yet dramatically, Winds of War is actually indispensable. That's my thesis today. First, why is this episode called a masterpiece? Because both White Base and Zeon play only with the information they're given. The game-like strategy is very strong, a brisk back and forth of mind games. By game-like, I don't mean mobile apps, I mean game theory in the academic sense. Game theory was first popularized in Japan by Masaki Yamada's 1970s novel, The Murderous Chess Game. That book gives a simple primer on game theory, which also helps in understanding the film Arrival I discussed recently. The episode plays out as a finite general zero-sum game. Zero-sum means, in a two-player game, one side's win is the other side's loss. It's like a fight to the death. Baseball works too. If one side wins, the reason they won is exactly why the other lost. For every gain, there's a matching loss that's zero-sum. Here, sum is the mathematical sum, hence, zero-sum. Economists often use that term. By contrast, game theorists in Japanese often say zero-wa game, a phrasing traced to the early translation. 2 players, finite length, that's a finite two-person game. Finite means there's a time limit, or a clear end, and play is cleanly split into enemy and ally. Two-person games divide into zero-sum and non-zero-sum. Zero-sum is where the player's interests perfectly conflict, as noted. Non-zero-sum refers to cases like a kidnapping, where without agreement both sides suffer losses. If the kidnappers kill or fail to collect ransom, everyone loses. One side's win condition doesn't automatically equal the other's loss. Both can lose, or conversely, both can win. That's why solving kidnappings is hard. In Criminal versus Police, police win by arresting, criminals win by escaping. In Parents versus Criminals, parents win by getting the child back, and minimizing costs becomes part of the game. The criminals win by returning the child safely, so, if caught, their charges are only kidnapping, so the game gets complex. Simple win-loss doesn't always apply. That's non-zero sum. Zero sum itself splits into strict zero sum and general zero sum. Strict zero sum rarely exists in reality. Strict zero sum is like chess, Go, or shogi. Perfect information on the board, no ambushes. Surprise moves exist, but that's just human oversight. You can't hide pieces in shogi. When both players see everything, it's perfect information. Otherwise, it's a general game. Warfare is usually finite in general. Information is incomplete. And it's zero sum. A killer be killed with no compromise. But in this episode, it morphs into a finite, general, non-zero sum game. The plot. White base plans to disembark. Some refugees insist, "Let us off here," and Bright Noah thinks of dropping them. For White base, it's a ruse to counterattack. For Zeon, it's a time game to deploy ground forces, so it becomes a non-zero sum where a compromise benefits both. This shifting, game, rules evolving mid-match gives the episode a Hunter x Hunter-like strategic feel. Here's how it plays out. First shot. White base skimming the earth, threading Grand Canyon ridges, practically scraping its belly along the walls. Lieutenant Reed says, "Can't you climb higher?" Bright points up, "What are you saying? Don't you see? Zeon fighters are waiting above. If they gain altitude even a little, they'll be attacked." Why altitude? Because deep in the canyon, Minovsky particles pool at high density, and terrain helps mask them. Inside the canyon, aircraft can't do the classic U-shaped dive, fire, climb, attack. Steep dive and zoom becomes risky. So they're stuck using guided missiles. No clear line-of-sight shots. And guided weapons struggle thanks to Minovsky jamming. The show states this neatly, very deft exposition. Meanwhile, refugees beg, "Let us off here, whatever it takes." Amuro Ray notices a parent and child gazing down at the landscape. It's not pretty. This is the Grand Canyon, a Death Valley vista stretching forever. The mother tells her perhaps 5 or 6-year-old, "Look, that's Earth. Isn't it wonderful? Your father was born here, and he was someone you can be proud of." Amuro watches, dumbstruck. He sees himself in it, and realizes these refugees each carry their own drama, foreshadowing for later. So when the refugees plead to disembark, Lieutenant Reed snaps, "Nonsense, out of the question." Bright says, "I have an idea. We request a temporary truce from Zeon and let them off." This vents frustration and eases food shortages, but more than that, he wants to exploit the truce for battle. It's risky. If Zeon discovers they're prepping for war during a truce, the refugees get branded guerrillas and can be summarily shot. Yet white base is at a huge disadvantage. Once it leaves the canyon for open lake country, Zeon will launch a full assault. So Bright thinks, if we'll all die in hours anyway, play every card now, and proposes his good idea. Zeon, for its part, has its own agenda. Garma, what do you think, Char? A truce to disembark refugees? Char, I don't like it. But whatever their aim, it by Garma. And then? Char, we can reinforce our slow ground units while we can. Garma, so our odds of victory improve. Good. Char, aside. Garma initially wants to ignore the truce, but Char stops him. Hold it, accept it. Whatever their intent, we gain time. From White Base's view, Zeon seems overwhelmingly advantaged, watching from above, ready to attack the moment they clear the canyon. But that's not the case. Zeon hadn't expected White Base to get this far, so their ground units weren't in place. So hypothetically, even without a truce, if White Base had punched through at speed, it might have escaped. But the crew imagines Zeon is fully prepared, with ground forces everywhere, and that any misstep means instant death. Meanwhile, Garma, being a pampered scion, isn't great at command. If Char were running it, he'd have pre-deployed ground troops where White Base might flee. Yet Char also doesn't want Garma earning glory too easily. Still, he isn't trying to spare White Base either. He's fighting with a hazy motive of nudging events to benefit himself. Thus, Garma keeps guessing at White Base's intentions, while Char says, forget their motives, stack advantages on our side. So both sides agree to the truce,